That sounds great. Well, in my case, good morning, and in your case, good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here today with you, and I thought I would make a few remarks, and then I would be very excited to listen and respond to any questions that you may have. So with that, let's dive right on in and begin. The first thing I'll tell you is the bad news, and the bad news is that startups are very hard work. We sometimes have these images that we have a brilliant idea and a limousine shows up at our door and we're swept away to fortune and fame. And that's typically not what happens. Building a startup company requires many diverse skills. It requires persistence, intuitiveness. It requires the ability to lead. It requires financial acumen. And it's certainly not for everybody. There are very high highs and very low lows along the journey. And so, and I don't say this to be discouraging, I say it to be realistic. Because the good news, even though it is very difficult work, and I would argue one of the most challenging things that somebody can do, the good news is it is an incredible opportunity for you as the entrepreneur. It's an opportunity not just to create wealth for you and your family, which is obviously wonderful, but it's also an opportunity to express yourself creatively and to really make a difference in the world. Entrepreneurs are the ones that change things, and they create jobs and hope. They create new products and services that benefit society. And they are often, in many cases, certainly here in the U.S., and in many cases throughout the world, the driver of economic prosperity. So while it is a challenging pursuit, it's also a noble one. And I hope that you go in eyes wide open, but at the same time, I hope that you go in with vigor and passion. So to illustrate what it may be like, giving yourself a view into the entrepreneurial world, I wanted to tell you a quick story. I'm sure that many of the folks in the room, and many students especially, have experienced a hangover. You know what a hangover is, everybody? Yeah. Okay. Well, imagine the worst hangover you've had, but multiply that. And that's how I was feeling back in the year 2000. What happened was, I was running my company, ePrize, and we had venture capital, and I had just met with my venture capitalists in late 2000 and was promised an additional $3 million of capital to continue to build the company. Well, they called me a few weeks later and said, hey, you know that $3 million that we talked about? No offense, we like you and all, but we've decided to get out of the venture capital business, so good luck, you're on your own. Well, this was you may have read about this. This was right after the dot-com crash. This was at a point where running an internet company was a very unfavorable thing to do. So the problem is I had made a number of commitments based on their funding promise, and I was stuck. I had no money in our company, and so what do you do? What do you do? This moment, this hangover moment, is very much what you will experience along your journey as entrepreneurs. It's not always the celebrating a great win. Very often it's getting kicked in the gut and having to have the resilience to bring yourself back. What I did is I had a mad scramble for the next 2 months. And it was difficult and painful and 2 a.m. evenings. And literally on the last day before our company failed, before everybody's paychecks bounced, and before we had to shut the company down, I was able to secure new investment from other investors, buy the venture capitalists out, and continue on with the company. So we often see in the movies these near-death experiences, and you will have those as entrepreneurs. And frankly, if you're not having them, you're probably not pushing hard enough. But from adversity, we learn great lessons. And in my case, I learned incredible things from that terrible hangover moment. I learned about the need to always be forward-looking and never rely on others. I learned about the need to always have a plan B. I learned about the need to have a resiliency and a persistence that no matter what happens, you keep fighting. Those lessons allowed me to go on to do a number of things over the years, and even though it was painful in the moment, again, we learn often from our darkest moments. I'll tell you another quick story of how I got started, and I'll get into some more specific ideas for you on your own entrepreneurial journey, but just to give you a little bit of context. So I started my first company when I was 20. And I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never even taken a business class. But I had this idea that I could sell computers to folks in my college community. At the time, you couldn't just order online from Dell. Discount computers weren't readily available. So I had the idea that I could buy mail-order components, assemble them in my college apartment, and then resell them as a completed package unit and make a decent profit. But again, I had no idea what I was doing. So I tried to figure out, how do I proceed? How do I get this company going? And I calculated that I need about a $1,000 capital infusion to get started. So I actually went to my father and asked him for a loan, a $1,000 loan. He requested a business plan, which was kind of funny. I didn't know what a business plan was. But I went ahead and prepared this fantastic business plan. It was like 100 pages long. I sent it off to him, and I was waiting for him to say, oh, that's great. I can't wait to support you. But what I heard was the opposite. I heard, hey, that's a terrible idea. You're going to fail. I would never give you this money. Don't do it. So what I decided to do was, I could have very easily quit. I could have said, wow, my own father says don't do this. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just a kid. I could have found 1,000 reasons not to proceed. But entrepreneurs proceed anyway, despite the adversity, despite the naysayers. In my case, I scrounged up some money by playing jazz gigs and launched my company, never looked back. And while it was difficult and I made a number of mistakes along the way, I ended up selling that company just before my college term ended, and it allowed me to go on to do many other things. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be having the pleasure of addressing you here today. So the point I want to make to you as emerging entrepreneurs is that you will be faced with all kinds of people telling you that it can't be done. And it's your job to ignore that noise. There's a great Chinese proverb that says, man who says it can't be done should not interrupt man doing it. Entrepreneurs are willing to proceed no matter what other people might say. So I went on to sell that company. I started another company and sold that. And then in 1995, I had the idea to launch an internet company, a web development company. So I would create corporate websites and e-commerce sites, things like that. The problem is nobody had ever heard of the internet. I would literally call people up and say, hey, have you ever heard of the internet? Can we build you a website? And they'd say, well, what's the internet? What's a website? Anyway, because I was looking into the future, that was what allowed me to seize the opportunity. If at that time in 1995, I looked at what the market reports said, they would say there is zero market for an internet company. Because market reports and often research are based on past information. They are trailing indicators, not forward-looking indicators. The problem that many entrepreneurs face is they make their decisions and they plot their course based on trailing indicators instead of looking into the future. In other words, the conventional wisdom of the day would tell me there's no market for such a thing called building websites. That would be a foolish thing to do. But what I decided to do was focus not where things were in the moment, but I aimed to a point in the future. And I realized that at the time, only 2% of companies had websites. But in a few years, everyone would need a website. So that forward-looking approach is what allowed me to be successful in that company. And I ultimately sold it in 1999 to a publicly traded firm. As entrepreneurs yourself, you're going to be deciding, what product should I build? What service should I offer? Which customers should I target? If you are only aiming at the circumstances of today, you may very well miss the opportunity. Because let's say it takes you a year to build your company. Well, if you're not aiming at the customer needs of the future, you may build something that would be exciting today, but lose its opportunity by the time you launch it. So it's important not to build something that's going to beat Facebook today or beat eBay today. It's important to think about where things are headed in the future. So after selling this company I started in 95, I sold it in 1999, I launched this other company called ePrize. What happened was that at that time in 1999, the whole world was focused on internet advertising. That was the sexy thing. That was the gold rush of our day. But when I zoomed out, I looked at the overall marketing mix and realized that there's a big category called promotions, and nobody was focused on doing that online. So what many entrepreneurs do is that they follow. they see a bunch of people doing one thing and they jump in and say, I'm going to do the same thing. So I could have very easily jumped into internet advertising. And frankly, I would have probably gotten lost. I probably would have never made much of our company. But instead of following what everyone else was doing, I decided to do the exact opposite and identified an opportunity in internet promotions that was wide open. Nobody else was doing it. And it was that contrarian thinking, doing the opposite of conventional wisdom, that allowed my company to get out of the gate quickly and allowed us to grow and continue to prosper. To give you a sense of it, over the next 11 years, I was the CEO, and we built the company to a fairly sizable firm. As of this year, we'll do about $100 million US dollars in revenue, and we have about 500 employees. And so the same contrary thinking at each step of the way, at each step of our growth, instead of saying, what is the obvious choice? What is everybody else going to do? We said, what is the opposite of that? What's everyone not going to do? And is there a way for us to embrace this non-traditional thinking? Speaking of non-traditional, 2 years ago, I stepped away from the CEO role at ePrize and took a chairman role in order to launch a new company, really. So we launched something called Detroit Venture Partners. And I live here in Detroit, Michigan, a large city in the U.S., but not known for technology investing. You typically think about high-tech investing happening in Silicon Valley. And we could have done the same thing. I could have moved to Silicon Valley and launched a venture capital firm there. But I decided to do it in Detroit, the non-traditional approach, because I saw a lot of opportunity, I saw low costs, and I saw a chance for my partners and I to help rebuild our challenged city. So we launched Detroit Venture Partners 2 years ago and have seen tremendous momentum. And again, our whole idea is, if we're going to go fishing, let's fish where all the other fishermen are not. There's no point in jumping into crowded waters. Let's find a fishing hole where others have ignored. Once again, that same contrary thinking has worked out great. We've looked at over 2,000 entrepreneurial opportunities and have made 15 investments to date, which makes us the single most active venture capital firm here in our state of Michigan. So that's my quick story. We'll have plenty of time and I can answer questions, but I wanted to just at least give you a backdrop and a context of where I'm coming from, and then more importantly, focus on some tips and ideas, strategies for you as emerging entrepreneurs that you can use to drive your own careers. The first thing I'd like to talk about is, what does it take to be a great startup leader? What are the attributes that you need in order to win in today's highly complex, highly competitive, and extremely fast-moving environment? The first thing you're going to want to do as an entrepreneurial leader is to reinforce what I call the why. In other words, why does your company need to exist? What greater purpose are you serving? How are you doing something that's different than others? If your company could go away tomorrow and nobody would care, maybe you should rethink your company in the first place. Great companies can clearly articulate why they exist. In our company, ePrize, we existed to change the way that brands interacted with consumers. So as an emerging startup entrepreneur, you're going to need to rally investors, you're going to need to rally team members and customers, and you're going to want to be able to clearly and passionately talk about why your company exists, not just what you do. Second key point is, when you are hiring people, they need to feel like they're on an important mission. The mission can't only be about making money. The way I've always looked at money is that it's a byproduct of doing great things. In other words, I was never driven by, hey, how can I go make as much money as possible? I was driven by, let's go build a great company. Let's create a culture that people love to work at. Let's treat our customers in a profoundly wonderful way and delight them. Let's drive incredible returns for our investors. And as a result, the money follows. It doesn't lead, it follows. So the economic returns, personally, are a byproduct of doing great things. So similarly, if you're trying to attract employees to a startup, and the best employees have a lot of different options, they're not desperate, they could work anywhere, you're going to want to make sure that they feel they are on an important mission that's bigger than just their paycheck or bigger than just their economic opportunity. They've got to be on a mission to change the world, to do something special and meaningful. And so the more that you can reinforce that, the better success you'll have in motivating and driving your team. Another important aspect of being a great startup leader is transparency. The first couple companies I built, I was very closed. I kept all the information tight. I protected my team members. I didn't share our challenges. I kept it all to myself. And that was a big mistake. And it didn't allow me to scale the company as large as it could have. In my most recent company, I did the exact opposite. Our company was a total open book. I shared our income statement. I shared our profit and loss. I shared not only our successes, but I shared our challenges. And when we made mistakes, I told the entire company about it. This level of transparency allowed me to build trust, and it allowed our team to come together and work in a unified format to solve our biggest challenges. As an entrepreneur, it's instinctive to be closed, but the more open and transparent you can be, the more success you'll have and the larger you will be able to scale. Another great tip for you as a startup leader, or an attribute that great startup leaders do, is I like to say they show instead of tell. It's one thing for me to say, hey, we're going to work really hard, we're going to do great things, I have a big vision. But if I don't demonstrate that behavior myself, it doesn't mean a thing. So as the CEO and the entrepreneur, you might be thinking, hey, this is great. I don't have to answer to anybody. I don't want to have a boss. I can do whatever I want. Couldn't be further from the truth. Great startup leaders report to their entire company. They report to their shareholders. And what they do is they serve, they don't take. They go in, they're the first people in the morning and the last ones to leave at night. They set the tone and the bar for working the hardest and being the most disciplined, because that in turn sets the message for everybody else. Show instead of tell. Along those same lines, it's important that you know when you're building your company who the king is. Many entrepreneurs that I've seen fail, they think the king is themselves. I'm the entrepreneur and it's all about me. The best company leaders, instead of crowning themselves, they crown the company. The company is the king. And all of us in our respective roles are here to serve the company, not any one individual's agenda. Again, the individual gains will happen as a byproduct of building a great company and doing great things. So the more that you can crown the company and make sure that everybody is there to serve the company instead of themselves, the more alignment and the more success you will enjoy. The last point I want to make about being a great startup leader is a concept of grit. Grit, I'm not sure if that translates very well, but the idea of grit is a willingness to do whatever it takes to win. The willingness to be scrappy. And when you hit a brick wall, because you for sure will hit brick walls building companies, instead of succumbing to the brick wall and saying, oh gosh, I hit this brick wall, I'm such a victim. Great grit-based entrepreneurs say, okay, brick wall, how am I going to get through it? How am I going to get around it? How can I dig a tunnel underneath it? How can I use all my ingenuity and creativity to solve and conquer problems instead of fall victim to them? That type of grit allows you to fight through recessions. It allows you to fight through competitive challenges. The word entrepreneur, and I recently wrote an article about this for Forbes, I don't like the word entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, first of all, was a French word, and it feels very elitist, like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. And it implies that you're just handed buckets of money and you wear a three-piece suit and you have a top hat and a monocle and you just sit back and polish your nails and command workers to do what they're told. That's not what really it takes to build a company. I think a much better term is a street fighter. Think about what a street fighter does. A street fighter improvises. They claw and scratch. They're dealt with adversity on a regular basis. They're thrown curveballs out of the blue, and they have to adapt and conquer them. They have a grit and determination, a willingness to fight that is unparalleled. That is much more accurate to what a company builder is than some entrepreneur who sits back with and sipping tea. Okay, on to a couple other things. A few thoughts for you as you go to build your own companies. First one, there's many people say of golden rules. I'll give you a golden rule. And I'm just being honest. And the reason I'm being so open and honest is because I want you to win. And I could tell you all kinds of fanciful tales, but I figure some more practical advice would be more helpful to you. The first thing is that no matter what you think, your company's going to take twice as long to build, and it's going to cost you 3 times as much. It just happens that way. And I've built 4 companies myself. I've now invested in, 50 companies throughout my career, and it just seems to always work that way. Things take twice as long and cost 3 times as much. So you might as well just plan for it and make sure that you're building contingency in place so that even though your original plan is exciting, you know what to do when it takes twice as long and costs 3 times as much. The other thing I would suggest when you start building your company is think very carefully about your culture. In fact, I would argue that your culture is your business. Your culture is your business. Because today, in the knowledge age, your business isn't likely going to be factory equipment. It's going to be the people that are on your team. And a culture is a philosophical approach to doing business. Rather than governing by rules, if you can govern by philosophy, you're going to have a much better result. Because the world is too complex and moving too fast to have rules for everything. So what you want to do is hire smart people that have good judgment and then empower them to use that judgment. So instead of giving them a rule for everything, if they understand philosophically what your company is all about, what your culture is, and what your culture stands for, they will be able to take that and run with it and make the best decisions. If you want to take a look at some examples of really good cultures, Zappos is a great one. If you Google Zappos culture, they list in clear detail their top 10 cultural values, and I would recommend checking it out. Another company that you may not have heard of is called Quicken Loans, Quicken Loans. They're the largest online mortgage company here in the U.S. And if you Google Quicken Loans culture, you'll also be able to find their set of cultural beliefs. And as a new entrepreneur, you have a lot of things to do. You're thinking about your product and service and financing, but I would encourage you to also think about your culture. What are the rules of engagement that you want people to embrace? Some examples, Quicken Loans cultures, they say things like, responding with urgency is the ante to play. And that's part of their culture, which means that if you work at Quicken Loans, you don't return someone's call or email 5 days from now, you return it instantly. So urgency is a strong part of their culture, and they ensure that that happens throughout every single day with every single employee. Another important point for you when building your company is the idea of simplicity. Simplicity, frankly, just wins. In other words, the more you can simplify your product, the more you can simplify your message, the more success you will have. At ePrize, the company I recently built, our product offering was fairly complex. And the more complex we made it, and we kept saying, oh, we could add this, we could add that, we can provide more features, we could add more complexity, it made it more difficult for people to buy. On the other hand, every time we simplified things, we started to win and we started to drive revenue. There's a movie, and it's a very famous movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it in Portugal, but the movie is called Forrest Gump. I don't know if anybody has seen that movie. But Forrest Gump, this guy was a very simple guy. He had he was a bit impaired, but there was also a lot of wisdom that came from Forrest Gump. What we like to say is we use Gump as a verb. In other words, hey, let's Gump this. So in other words, if I said to you, well, I'm launching a product and it has multiple sophisticated channels and reaches distribution lines and has data schema and I use all these buzzwords, someone in our company would say, wait, time out. Let's Gump that. Gump it down for me, which means simplify it to the point where we can understand the core meaning in plain, simple English. The more you can simplify, the more you will win and the more your customers will embrace your offering. The other thing I would encourage you to do as entrepreneurs is different than things were in the past. In the industrial age, you had to have a big idea, lots of capital. You would go build a factory or buy a ton of raw materials, and then you'd hope for the best. So what you did is you imagined in your mind one big idea, you put all your resources into a very big bet, you built everything, you rolled it out, and then you crossed your fingers and said, oh, I hope people buy my product. Today, things are radically different. And I would encourage you to think about your business not like that at all, not like one giant bet, but more like a series of small experiments and adjustments. So you try one thing, you tinker with it, spend as little as you can on it, see if you can get some market feedback, get that data, and then change it and tweak it and adapt it. So if you think about your business as a series of small experiments and adjustments, you're going to be much better off than putting everything you have into one giant idea and just hoping for the best. Okay, I want to walk you through a little bit, change gears now, talking about venture capital. As you raise money for your businesses, to launch your businesses, there are many ways to get financing. You might borrow it from friends and family, you might use credit cards, you might get a bank loan, but you also may seek professional investment. And I want to give you the insider's view on how venture capitalists look at companies. So if you are seeking a lot of capital, you'll know how to get it. So the way that I look at a company, if I'm considering an investment, is in three primary categories. We call it the jockey, the horse, and the race. The jockey, the horse, and the race. So the jockey is the entrepreneur and or the team. And what we look for is maybe not what you would think. We don't look only for people that are charismatic and visionary and are great speakers. We look for people that have humility and that are open-minded and that can demonstrate a track record of delivering and executing. Maybe they haven't built a company, but show that they've been able to actually get things done. Show that they are able to have the discipline, focus, and intensity needed to build a startup. We like to see how people have dealt with adversity. So it's one thing to be a showman and salesy and say, oh, look at my great company, we're going to be billionaires. That's fine, but I want to see what's underneath. What's the substance underneath that entrepreneur? The second category we call the horse. And what we mean by that is, what is the business or product itself? Is it different? The world doesn't need another copycat company. The world doesn't need another Me Too player. What the world craves and will pay handsomely for is originality, new ideas, things that are truly innovative and remarkable. So if someone comes and pitches me on another Groupon copycat, no thanks. But if someone pitches me on something that's truly inspired and different, I'm much more excited to listen. We also look at, does the company have scale? Can it grow into be a big business? Professional venture investors are not so interested in backing small, what we call lifestyle businesses. In other words, if you launched a small consulting firm, and that firm grew over several years and a lot of hard work, and you ended up making $500,000 US a year in profit, that would be a very nice outcome. There's nothing wrong with that. You and your family would live a wonderful life. But those aren't the types of companies that professional investors back. That what we call is a lifestyle business. What venture capitalists back are companies that could become large public companies, that could become the next Facebook. So you're going to need to make sure that the business that you're pitching has the opportunity to scale and scale big. Finally, we look at what we call the race, which means what is the external factors involved with this company? What's the market look like? Is it a growing industry or a shrinking industry? Is it a large industry or a small one? How many competitors are there? How strong are the competitors? So again, we look at the jockey, the horse, and the race, meaning the team, the product or business itself, and the market and competitive landscape. And we factor in all those decisions when evaluating a company. So now that you know that, you can frame your argument as you try to pitch for venture capital accordingly. A few tips and best practices as you look to raise capital. The first one is research and make sure that you're targeting the right investor. At Detroit Venture Partners, for example, we only back early stage tech companies and all digital companies. So even though an iPhone, for example, is a technology, that is a physical device that we wouldn't invest in. We invest in software and social media and mobile apps. So if you came to us with the best medical device ever or the most incredible breakthrough drug therapy, no matter how good it was, we're not going to target. That's not our mandate. So make sure that what you're pitching is the sweet spot of that investor, or you're going to waste their time and yours. The second thing to do is do your best, and this is not always easy, to create urgency and scarcity. Urgency and scarcity. For venture capitalists, generally time is on our side. So if you come and tell me about your great ideas, I can wait as long as I can to see if you've actually performed what you said you're going to do. You have to create urgency to get us to get ready to write a check quickly. The best way to do that is to create some competitive tension. So in other words, if you came with your idea and I liked it, and you said to me, and you can't lie, but you have, if it's true, to say, listen, there are 4 other investors looking at this. We've decided to take $1 million of venture capital. We believe that there's the appetite among all these investors for $5 million. We need to know where you stand within 30 days, or you're going to miss the opportunity. Now I have to, as the venture capitalist, respond. And one of the things that VCs are driven by often is the fear of missing out. So if I feel like, wow, there's a deal that's a really good deal and I might miss out on it, that's going to create both the urgency and scarcity necessary for it to reach the top of my pile and for me to put a lot of resources behind it. Next piece of advice. I hope I don't offend anybody by this, but just no BS. No BS. It's so easy because you want desperately to take capital so you can follow your dream. And it's so easy when you're asked a question to just make something up or try to dance your way through it. The thing is that people in our society have really good BS detectors. And venture capitalists have incredibly good BS detectors. And we can sense and we know when you start to stumble on something. Or if you tell me something that I don't really trust, I'll just write it down and I'll ask you 3 days later the same question. And if you responded to it differently, the game is over. You've lost. Because if I can catch you in something that isn't exactly true, it's going to completely undermine the integrity of everything else you've ever told me. So be open and honest. And sometimes not having the best answer, having an answer that you know that I don't want to hear and saying it truthfully is a better way to make your case. Because venture capitalists know that everybody's human, nobody's perfect, no company is perfect. So if you have something, instead of trying to hide it, just be open about it. And you're going to build a new level of trust with that investor, and they're going to want to be a part of it. Don't try to hide the ball. Next thing is to know your numbers cold. Another way to turn off a venture investor is if I say to you a pretty basic question, like, what do you think your gross margin will be on a long-term basis? And you say, gee, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you on that. It's one thing if I ask a question like, how many staples are you going to buy in 2017? Who cares? But the core economics of your business, you need to know them cold. If I say, for example, how many units per month do you think a salesperson might be able to sell? You don't want to say, gee, I don't know, I never thought of it that way. The core driving assumptions of your business, you need to know cold. And a venture capitalist is going to respond very positively if you do. Another thing you have to bring to every meeting is passion. If you're not on fire about your business, nobody else will be. So I'll tell you a good way to kill it. I've had people come to me and they just want money. So they'll say, I've got 3 ideas. They're all really cool. Which one do you like? And I'll go build that one. So I say to myself, if you're not ready to quit your job and risk everything you have, if you're not so passionate about one idea that you can't sleep at night, there's no way you'll be able to get it off the ground. So you're better as an entrepreneur. That passion has to ooze out of you. You have to be willing to pound on the table saying, this is a company that has to exist. This is a company that I have to build. This is a company that I'm so passionate about. I will sacrifice whatever it takes to bring it to life because I have to. This isn't some money-making scheme. This is my calling as a human being. This is what I have to do to fulfill my destiny. If you're not pouring out passion, it's going to be very difficult to get a venture capitalist to take a risk on you. And finally, the executional plan. You don't have to have it exact, but you have to have a pretty good sense of how you intend to execute with a decent amount of detail. So for example, if I ask you, oh, that's a great idea for a product, how do you plan to get customers? And you tell me your marketing plan is you're going to use Facebook, use YouTube, and it will go viral, you're going to get laughed at because that has no specificity to it. It's not a specific plan. If, on the other hand, you say, let me show you the storyboard for a YouTube video that we think is really funny and has the chance to go viral, at least that has some specifics to it. Or if you say, we're going to buy the following keywords on Facebook at a specific price per keyword, and with this anticipated click-through rate and this anticipated conversion rate, here's our actual anticipated cost per user acquisition. At least now I know that you're thinking about it critically. But if you say things that are totally vague, that is a red flag to a venture capitalist because they think you are not thinking critically about the details of your business. So make sure that you're armed, at least in the big areas of your business, with some very specific specificity and approaches. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with 7 common traps, 7 common things that I see entrepreneurs do that get them into trouble. And then after I run through those 7, we'll open things up to a nice question and answer dialogue. The first one is a funny saying. I think it was invented in old Western movies here in the U.S., which is a saying called all hat and no cattle, which basically means an entrepreneur who has all kinds of salesmanship and they tell such a great story and they're very good presenters, but they lack substance. All hat and no cattle, which means a lot of showmanship and very little substance underneath it. I've invested in entrepreneurs like that, and they tend to fizzle out very quickly. There's an entrepreneur that I invested in who I was on the phone with this morning, actually, who's the opposite. This guy kind of comes across like he's unsure of himself. He stumbles on his words a little bit. He's almost a little awkward when you talk to him. But this guy has no hat and tons of cattle, because this guy is the first guy in, the last guy to leave. He's an absolute detail maniac. He holds his team accountable. He's disciplined and focused, and his follow-through is impeccable. This guy's company went from $0 to $3.5 million in revenue in his first year with incredible profitability, and he's on track to triple his revenue next year. So beware the all hat and no cattle trap. The second one is another saying I'll share, which is that more companies die of indigestion than starvation. More companies die of indigestion than starvation, which means that if you try to do too many things, if you try to take on too much capital at once, if you try to grow too quickly, that is actually much more risky than trying to take a more disciplined and measured approach. Next thing is not managing what we call your runway. In other words, how much capital do you have left in the bank to continue your pursuits? So if you have all these ideas, but you're not managing the fact that you only have 3 months of runway or remaining capital, you could get in a situation where you're not going to live to see the day to fulfill your game plan. So making sure that you're always keeping an eye on how much money you have left in the bank. The fourth common trap that I see is lacking real differentiation. In other words, we talked about that before, but being a me too or a copycat company. If I ask you, why is your company different? Or how do you talk to customers? What do you say about your company? And you respond, oh, we have low prices and great quality, and we have high integrity. Those are all nice things, but they don't say anything because everybody says those same things. So you need to communicate your message in a way that is truly differentiated and truly represents a unique offering, not one that everybody else has the same thing to say. The fifth one is if you are dealing with investors or employees, the thing that people hate the most are surprises. If you have a problem and you tell your investor that early on, the investor is going to be helpful and want to make sure that that they can help see you through those challenges. If on the other hand you tell them, oh, 2 weeks ago this happened and I just never told you, investors, employees, shareholders, customers hate surprises. So the more that you can manage those various stakeholders and those audiences to avoid surprising them, the better. The sixth common trap I like to call all religion and no science. All religion and no science. Simply meaning that as an entrepreneur, you have to be able to see into the future. You have to have a vision and be able to imagine something that doesn't yet exist. Call that religion. But at the same time, you can't ignore the facts. Rather, you have to confront those brutal facts. So if you have this big, bold vision that your salespeople are going to sell 100 units a month, and for the last 8 months, they only sell on average 4 units a month, you have to confront those brutal facts. So if you're still saying to yourself, oh, I'm so focused on the religion, I'm sure next month they're going to sell 100, you're probably teasing yourself. So making sure that to win, you're having a combination of both religion and science. And then finally, the last trap that I see is the need to be what we call the smartest guy in the room. It's great that you're a talented entrepreneur and you're smart and have tons of passion. But the idea to win is to hire people smarter than you, not dumber than you. Don't be threatened by the talents of others. Embrace them. The best thing you can do is find the smartest, most talented people that make you look bad. because that means your company is going to look good. So just a final closing thought, and then I'd be happy to take any questions. Again, the thing I want to really reinforce is where I started. Building a company, attracting capital, forging new ground, winning first customers. These are all very difficult things. But I can't imagine a pursuit in life more worthy of pursuit. Being an entrepreneur will allow you to do incredible things in our world. It will help you drive the economic engine of your country. It will allow you to create wealth for your family. It will allow you to help employees and customers lead better lives. This is your chance to leave your fingerprints on the world, and I hope that you proceed certainly with some caution, but more importantly, with lots and lots of passion. So with that, I'd be thrilled to answer any questions that you may have.
I lost you as you were talking about the first trap.
Oh, yeah.
The first trap. Well, I gave a really rousing closing, too. I'm sorry you missed that. I didn't know that you lost me.
Please enter the conference code now.
So they control the call, so we just at their will.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, maybe I'll suggest doing this because I want to make sure I know we're running short on time, and I'd like to have an opportunity to answer some questions. So maybe I'll just kind of conclude with a closing statement, and then answer your questions if that's okay. The statement that I kind of ended with just now was that being an entrepreneur, as I said at the beginning, is tough. And there are many challenges. It's difficult to invent a company. It's difficult to raise capital. It's difficult to get your first customer. At the same time, I can't imagine a more worthy pursuit. Being an entrepreneur allows you to make an impact on your national economy. It gives you an opportunity to create jobs for people and to help their lives. It gives you an opportunity to help your customers and create wealth and success for you and your family. While it's difficult, like I said, I can't imagine a more important and worthy pursuit. And I hope that you proceed with some new intelligence today, but more importantly, with just tons of passion. It's not an easy path, but for me anyway, over the last 23 years, it's been an incredibly rewarding one, and I only wish you incredible success on your own journey. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? You can stand up and just speak your question loud enough. So.
Okay. My name is George. I'm from Lisbon School of Economics and Management. And I was asked on a survey about the things that make people entrepreneurial. But they asked me an app for a smartphone. And I got a crazy idea 2 days after about the grades obtained in college. And I call it grades checkpoint. I don't know if it's reasonable, if it's a crazy one.
For the gentleman, I didn't get your name. I'm sorry, at the beginning, at the front of the room. Could you just quickly paraphrase the question? It was very hard to hear on this, and I just want to make sure I answered accurately.
Yeah, he was talking about the idea for an app that he has.
An app on the smartphone of the grades got in college or at high schools, because the grades are we can see it on the website. But directly, the grades being transferred to the smartphone without being asked to the website.
The idea for the app is basically so that people can check on their grades directly on their smartphone instead of going through the website.
And the question was, what do I think of it?
Yeah.
I think it's a smart idea. You may want to look. I believe that exists. I don't mean to rain on your parade, but you may want to do some research, because I believe apps like that do exist. If not, it sounds like an important one to do.
Some other questions? Yeah. Yeah. No.
Okay. My name is Maria José Amish, and I'm launching a platform to empower women in Spanish and Portuguese communities to launch their business and to pursue it as street fighters, as you mentioned. And my question here is regarding when you recruit a team, at the beginning you mentioned you have difficulties, financial difficulties in paying people the right amount of money that they should deserve to come on board. You can share your mission and your passion. Nevertheless, money is always also important. What about making those people at the beginning part of the company, as stakeholders, as shareholders of the company? What would you think of that?
So I heard that question loud and clear. First of all, I loved what you said. You said, I'm doing this, and you said exactly why. I'm working to help women launch companies. I mean, so congratulations. It sounds like an incredible pursuit. To answer your question, I think getting people bought in on all levels early on is really important. And getting them bought in emotionally into the mission and everything else is important. But I think that getting them bought in financially is also important. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do that. One way is to just issue stock in the company, and there are a number of other ways to give them equity upside as well. Depending on the circumstance, some ways are better than others. The only thing I would say is be a little careful about just issuing shares of the company out in terms of raw ownership. Because let's say, for example, that person doesn't work out in a year. Then you've got a random shareholder out there, and if they go work for a competitor, they still get your annual reports. And so there are some challenges with just issuing stock. Another way to do it is to issue stock options. So they essentially have the right to buy stock at a later date at a predetermined price, and that if they leave the company has the right to buy back those options. The other thing you could do is you could do some type of profit sharing plan, or you could even do something that is called like an exit bonus, which is to say that if we sell this company in 5 years, we'll give you 5% of the proceeds of the sale. So that has the same general effect as the stock, but they don't become a technical shareholder, so you don't get into shareholder rights issues. And you also, if for some reason, if they leave the company, that transaction bonus would go away. So I don't mean to get too technical on you. The idea of incenting people to be financially connected to the success of the company is great, and I highly recommend it. Just be thoughtful about the mechanics that you use to make that happen.
Are there any other questions? Josh, I have a question. Since we missed out on the other 6 traps, could you go over some of those, please?
Sure, you bet. Okay, so did you get the first one, all hat and no cattle?
Yes, we did.
Okay, great. So the second one is that more companies die of indigestion than starvation, which basically means that sometimes trying to do too much becomes deadly. So if you're trying to do, hey, I'm going to open in 15 markets all at once, or I'm going to have 30 different products to sell, or I'm going to go after all these different target customers, that's more risky, even though it seems like you're being more bold, than it is taking a more thoughtful and measured approach. So think about the startup as a series of small experiments and adaptations, and try to rack up one win and use the success of one win to drive the next win, instead of trying to do too much all at once. The third common trap is what I call not managing your runway. And we venture capitalists call your runway how many months of remaining cash that you have on hand to keep the company alive. So you might be spending all your time thinking about this big launch in 6 months, but you don't bother to realize that you only have 3 months of remaining capital, and you won't live to see the day of your launch. So making sure that you're working either with your own team and or your investors to manage your runway, to always be ahead of your capital needs. It's very, very difficult to raise capital at the last minute. If it's, oh my God, I got to raise money by next week or we're out of business, that's tough. If it's, hey, 3 months from now or 5 months from now, we're going to run out of capital, let's plan proactively now, a much, much easier thing to do. The fourth common trap is lacking real differentiation. If I say to you, well, what do your people say about your company? Why would someone choose you versus a competitor? And your answer is, oh, well, we offer great quality and low prices, and we have lots of integrity. Those are things that everybody says, and they basically mean nothing. If you could get confused with a competitor, that to me is the worst insult in the business world. I would rather you alienate and anger and infuriate 20% of the market and have 80% love you, and at least know what you stand for. So stand for something unique, make sure that your approach is unique, that your product offering is unique, that the way you do business is unique. so that you become a category of one, so that there's everybody else in your industry and then there's you. Oh, you're the crazy guys that do things differently. That is the best position to be in, and lacking differentiation is a huge trap. The fifth one is the idea of surprises. Nobody likes, well, people like birthday surprises, but people in business hate surprises. And so if you have bad news, communicate the bad news with transparency and urgency. Because if you tell an investor you've got bad news quickly, then they can help you through that challenge. If you tell them 3 weeks after something bad happened, that's a surprise that they're going to hate. Same with your employees, same with your customers. So try to have a no assumptions, no surprises mantra, which is going to help all of your audience. The sixth trap that I see, I call all religion and no science. All religion and no science. So as an entrepreneur, you need to have religion, which means that you have a belief. You can see something that doesn't yet exist. You have a vision and a passion. Fantastic. You need that. But that's not the only attribute that you need. You also need science, which means you have to confront the brutal facts and look at data and look at what results are you're chalking up. So in other words, if you have a vision, your religion is our salespeople are going to sell 100 units per month, and you built your whole company's future on that premise, and then over the last 6 months, your salespeople are only averaging 4 sales each per month. If all you do is commit and dig in and say, no, they're going to sell 100 next month, and then they don't. No, next month they're going to sell 100, and then they don't. You're kidding yourself. So you have to have a fine balance between having religion, having passion, and a view into the future that doesn't yet exist, but also making sure that you're carefully monitoring the key metrics of the business, that you're seeing what's actually happening in real life and making adjustments, so you're not just basing the entire philosophy and plan of the business on a wish. And the last trap that I see is the need to be the smartest guy in the room. Sometimes entrepreneurs have an insecurity, and so they want to feel all powerful and have all the answers, so they hire essentially inferior people. And that may make them feel really smart when they're in a meeting, but it makes their company perform terribly. A much better approach is to be the dumbest guy in the room. Find smarter people than you. Surround yourself with the best and the brightest. And it doesn't matter if you look uncertain in a boardroom, because your company is going to shine in the marketplace. So don't worry about the smartest guy in the room. If I were you, I'd try to be the dumbest guy in the room. So anyway, those are some common traps that I see all the time. And if you can know them and avoid them, you'll be well on your way to creating your own successful company.
Any last questions? Okay. I think you had your hand up first.
Hi, my name is Ricardo. I study here in Lisbon, Portugal, and I'm a student of medicine. I have been always really passionate about technology and the app development, and so I would like to ask you a question. What if I have an idea for an app, but I don't know how to build my team? Which skills do you think are the most important when building a team? Are those the management skills, the web design skills, the computing engineering skills? Can you please give me some insights on that perspective, please?
Did you catch that, Josh?
Sure. I did. I heard that okay. There's no hard rules on that. I've seen different teams structure early on in different ways. So what I would do, a good way to think about it is, what is core to your business and what can be outsourced to start? So if building technology is core to your business, you may want to hire a technology lead internally. On the other hand, if it's something that you can outsource to begin with, to get a prototype working, for example, maybe you don't need to have that person on your initial team. I think that often hiring a CFO too early or a head of HR too early is a mistake. You probably want to do that yourself and be close to the business. One thing that people don't usually hire early enough, which I would encourage, is somebody to drive sales. There's a saying in the startup community that revenue cures all problems. So you can have the greatest whiz-bang technology, but if no one's buying it, you're totally reliant on investor money. On the other hand, if you can get in front of real customers and not only make the cash register ring, but also get real feedback from real customers, you get out of the ivory tower and you start to get much more market traction. So clearly you need a business person to sort of oversee and have the vision and own the roadmap of the company. Sometimes you may or may not want to have a technology lead internally, but I would think about hiring somebody who's going to be market facing. It could be you, but somebody who's going to go out there and really be with customers and get the cash register ringing. Beyond that, it's usually on a case-by-case basis, but I would say that it's often a failure point to overhire quickly. So you might go raise $2 million of capital, and your instinct would be, I'm going to go hire 30 people. I'd be very careful on hiring people early on, and also interview them nonstop, because you're only as strong as the weakest member of your team. So take extra caution, and I would rather you overpay and evaluate to get a smaller team of A-level people than have a bigger team of B and C-level people. It will pay off every time.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but just wanted to thank you once again on behalf of the U.S. Embassy, the Nova Entrepreneurship Society, and the American Corner here at Nova University. And thank everybody here for participating. Okay, thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Convidamos todo o pessoal para sair, temos alguns refrescos para vocês e às 4h15 vamos começar com o lançamento oficial do projeto StartMeUp.